thank the organizers as well as the Architecture League and all of the other sponsors of this wonderful event for having me here. Really greatly appreciate it. This is an event that's taking place about some 6 weeks after my move to New York, 6 weeks after the founding of this entity called the Net Lab at the Columbia Graduate School of Architecture, Preservation and Planning. So there's been almost no time to prepare for this, and I have almost no time to present. I've already used up 1/30 of it. So therefore, the title, Almost Nothing. But also, I suppose that speaks a little bit about my interest today, which is to talk to you about this question of the underspecified, which was raised so eloquently last night. The NetLab's project is like the symposium of provocation to architecture. Architecture is a slow field. It's the most heavily capitalized of the arts, and therefore the most cautious. It's also very much a legacy of the craft era. That's why we have architecture with us. It's an artifact of pre-industrialization. It's this very appeal of the authentic, of the pre-industrial world that makes it attractive to many in the profession or seeking to join the profession, but also to many outside. Now, while digital culture has definitely impacted our field, CAD tools, in the most obvious way, have made it much easier to design, as have all sorts of other programs, from programs for writing specifications, to spreadsheets, to word processing programs, to email, to websites, so on and so forth. Still, architecture has responded with its primary imperative, at least in the kind of the neo-avant-garde, being a need to slow down, to re-entrench architecture in craft. This seems to be the task for architects who are most heavily engaging the blob. Production of the blob simply reinscribes craft-based production within the digital. And thus, it's no accident that it is dominant, or that it is the strongest in these twin poles of LA, where I came from, and New York, where I am now, where working for free is so entrenched among recent graduates. This is the Frank Gehry's Experience Music Center, of course, a building that tests the limits of what could be constructed. It's intended to be a hallucinogenic experience, although whether that hallucinogenic experience is the effect of watching Hendrix at Woodstock while on acid, or whether it's due to the heady vapors of late capital is, I think, an important question. You can just imagine how you might feel watching the fantastic accumulation of dollars at Microsoft. Gehry, the reason I invoke this building is because not only was it a tremendously complex building to make, and this issue of designing complexity on purpose is one that I'd like to raise, whether this is really what architecture should do, but also because Gehry set out to say that his own role is to be a master builder, much like a medieval mason whose ideas would be realized directly, that is, his hand gestures could, through the most elaborate of software and also the most careful fabrication, actually be realized directly. That is, he's seeking not for mediation. He's not interested in anything that we've learned since McLuhan. He's rather seeking for authenticity. Aha. Oh, this is very nice, isn't it? As I said, these things have agency. So, if nothing else, I'm just going to go to my other program, Keynote, which did not crash on me, and will be fine. All right. Better. Let's contrast Gehry's Experience Music project to this proto-blob. This is Rainer Banham's environment bubble, which suggests that architecture can be a McLuhan-esque extension of the body's heat regulation apparatus. Banham's bubble was quite literally created by HVAC, determined not by form but by programming, by the media center in the middle, and by the desire of the individual to maintain a certain temperature within. According to a quote from Banham, if old nature could be kept under the proper degree of control, sex left in, streptococci taken out, the United States would be happy to dispense with architecture and buildings altogether. Instead of ditching the thin inflatable skin, the blob fossilizes it. Even just as radical, perhaps more radical, was Archigram's Instant City, a rapid intervention onto a post-industrial northern British town that used Rupert the Blimp to deploy a network, a communicational network, together with a barrage of media that would bring that place into the realm of the post-Fordist bottom-up creative work. Instant City was certainly influenced by Townscape as well as a British interpretation of the Duchampian found object through the Independent Group and the distant voice of McLuhan. But it was above all a suggestion, a visionary suggestion, that in the future, architectural interventions could be about programming. Instant City suggested that architecture could be about event, could be created by events, by performances even. Archigram very soon after retreated from this project. Peter Cook today, of course, makes blobs himself, we saw last night. Now, two contemporary issues, or maybe not quite contemporary issues. Let's think back for a minute to the condition before the internet, before mobile technologies. We were all alone in a disconnected world, especially freaks and geeks, people who seem to inhabit this room probably. Who could be more alone than those different from everyone around them? This is a photograph of Dallas, Texas. Even if you were surrounded by people, what connection did you have with them? And this only became more exacerbated as post-Fordism demanded that you be yourself, yet your difference from others drew you into a disconnected private world, especially when on the streets, when mobile. With mobile technology and the internet, however, it is possible to easily maintain links with the intimate people in your life, even if they're distant from you. The result is what Ichio Habuchi calls a telecocoon, a portable intimate space that follows you around, allowing you to telematically share your space with those with whom you would also share the most intimate physical space, your close family and friends. Our mobile technologies serve as personal territorial devices, reinscribing intimate space wherever and whenever we may want it. I recently had a friend whose son went off to college on a different coast. I said, what's it like having your kid, this is one of my kids, go off to that far away? And she said, just the same as here. It calls me on the cell phone all the time. Mom, I'm walking to class. Thought you'd like to know. The telecocoon maintains intimacy at a distance, facilitating private encounters in both public and private spaces. In his book, The Longtail, Chris Anderson discusses how these big Web 2.0 media aggregators like Netflix, Amazon, Apple's iTunes, YouTube, and so on promote a long tail effect in which consumers are able, even encouraged, to drift down the long tail of media. Economically, the result is that the small fraction of hits no longer dominates. For the big aggregators, the long tail, full of tiki lounge music, le parkour videos, and books by architecture professors, is as important as a small number of hits. And it's hits with a big H, should be big H there. More long tail. Steve Johnson, on the other hand, extends the idea of the long tail to suggest to the urban, suggesting that dense cities like the one we're in act like physical versions of the long tail. That people with esoteric interests can meet up easily. Want to go to a Swedish knitting club, a furry fetish party, a Flint napping get-together, a metrosexual MVRDV fan club? No problem, there's something for all of you. Johnson concludes that this urban long tail will forever encourage the growth of cities, keeping them vibrant, exacerbating them. But I'd like to suggest a problem with the long tail, the urban long tail. If telecocoons reinforce our bonds with those we're already the most intimate with, and the urban long tail validates our lifestyle choices, doesn't this lead to even greater isolation from the people around us who we don't know, from those familiar strangers? A recent survey suggested that people today have 1/3 less friends than they did a decade ago. The number has recently declined from 3 to 2. You used to have 3 friends, now you have 2. Similarly, we may be reading political blogs, but based on long-tail constituencies, those are serving to polemicize, not to create discourse. the Cluetrain Manifesto and other junk like that may say that the net is about conversations, but as the experience we had this summer on the IDC list showed, many of these conversations are really narrowcasting. I mean, it's all about narrowcasting today. There's a downside to the loss of the mass. There's a downside to mass communication. What to do? Let's not search for technotopia. The changes that media cause in everyday life are going to be massive. They will exacerbate existing trends. Just how is the question we can get into today. In strategizing for the near future, we need to start thinking about how to avoid the utopianism that's going to feed the next stage of marketing strategies. What are the subtle methods, very subtle methods, by which we could tweak the existing condition? Our own interest at AUDC, which is the group that ultimately drove the Net Lab, is in the underspecified. And also, we're going to show you two projects very quickly. Both of them are based on projects that other people have done. One is based on this project, Hole in Space, which was done by Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz in Los Angeles and New York in 1980. The next project is based on something Natalie Jeremijenko did. In this and in both cases, we were interested in how we could take other existing things and just subtly tweak them and see if we could build on them, maybe in a kind of almost open source method, even if things weren't necessarily open source. So this project suggests a way of dealing with this problem of disconnection. In 1982, a link was opened up for 3 days between New York City and Los Angeles. This was called Hole in Space, and you see some of the video here. It simply enough was 2 video cameras, 2 microphones, and 2 sets of speakers and 2 projectors, projecting from something from a wall in Avery Fisher Hall to a wall at Century City. And there was no announcement of this project. The virtue of it was that it was underspecified. The virtue of this project was very much that there was no game set up. Individuals invented their own games, charades, whatever you wanted. They simply set this project up and let it go. They did not advertise it. The first day, a few people came and sort of looked at each other. Listen to what this woman says.
Said they could have done it 25, 30 years ago. Why didn't they?
20 years ago, there would have been hundreds and hundreds of people, you know, and it's like a little diversion, you know. It's really...
So what interests me is that they could have done it 40 years ago. They could have done it 25 years ago. They did it, in fact, 26 years ago for 3 days. We have iChat, which is very much about narrowcasting. We still don't have this. This would take an incredibly minimal amount of effort. The reason I haven't done it is because I'm unfortunately pathetic, you know, with electronics and have absolutely no money, whereas just a slight bit. But it would require very little. And what we suggested was in a competition entry I did with my partner, Robert Summerall, that we called Windows on the World. We suggested, oh, by the way, here's for those of you who were wondering if we'd ever see situationism again, to make, after yesterday's comments, I thought I should show some. To make our project palatable, we decided to invoke the SITs, in this case blatantly. Of course, now it's unpalatable. This is a 2-year-old project, so it still didn't win the competition anyway. In any case, what if you took the psychogeographic map of the city and suggested that it could be a map of the world, that the links between these areas could be holes in space, that is, and that these wouldn't be things that would be announced, these would be things that you would stumble upon. You walk down an alley and you peer into the Gaza Strip. You can't lob a bomb, they can't lob a bomb at you, so what do? What kind of relationship do you evolve? You walk down at the end of a subway platform and you see Tokyo. What interests us is this possibility. This would radically change the nature of urban life if these things began to proliferate for a very small amount of money. And yet, it wouldn't be about specifying certain kinds of behaviors. Perhaps, in fact, these things would become, perhaps people would start using them for meetings. In fact, on day 2 of the Hole in Space, people began bringing their babies to show their families and so forth. By day 3, what they did was day 3, when they announced on the news, so many people showed up, it led to gridlock, so they shut the project down. And so maybe what's interesting about the project is that it winds up or maybe not what's interesting. One thing you do is maybe you wind up switching the links periodically just to keep people on their toes and prevent a kind of sort of nesting behavior with regard to that. That was one project. The other project that we're looking at is this project. We poached a project by Natalie Jeremijenko, wonderful work, How Stuff is Made, a website she put together. And in the studio we're working at Columbia, we decided that we were really interested in this issue of how Latour's demand to make things public, to expose how things are the product of these complex assemblages of networks. And this is what I'm going to show you is a little bit more than even certainly we've accomplished. It's obviously just a thought experiment so far, at least part of it is. The next slide, in other words. Which is, we suggested, what if you could take, your cell phone that Eric was showing us. What if you could take your cell phone and, these things have video cameras on them. What if you could scan in UPC codes with it? Similarly, you can do this already with any MacBook. You can use Delicious Library to scan in ISBN codes or UPC codes and keep track of things on Amazon. What if instead of just downloading stuff from Amazon, you could have a link to something like How Things Work, which is How Stuff is Made, which is this wonderful encyclopedia that traces how things are made, traces their genealogy, their production. And so in this case, you brought something home, a syringe and a box of something strange. You were interested in what this material was. You then, did a scan of it. And then, this is very nicely designed. Derek Lindner is one of my students who I believe is here today, did this. And maybe this would be a little bit, more, trio screenish, or maybe it would be something on more for the web. But you might find out this kind of information, that Botox is made out of the most toxic substance on Earth, that it's made out of human blood that's donated by the American Red Cross. You could investigate the processes by which these things were made. It wouldn't have to, again, one of the things would be that you would also contribute to this, like in Wikipedia. The thought is that what if you could, contribute timelines of these things, comments on it, bad reactions. And that little tweak, if you could just take, a media wiki type interface like Wikipedia has, take either a portable unit like a cell phone or your computer, scan in UPC codes and pull down that information. It would take a good programmer a good week and a half to figure this out, I think. Could be an amazing way of changing our relationship to the things that surround us, as everybody could begin doing their own investigations, uploading their own stories. People working in the factories might tell us things. Okay, so these two very brief little projects. So just the last slide is black, too, because it asks us, where do we end up? We end up with a suggestion, then, that architectures, or my suggestion, that perhaps the emerging role for architecture is not to make form, but rather to operate with and in forces, to program spaces and things. Jacques Derrida, in Writing Indifference, said, form fascinates when you no longer have the force to act within force itself. And that's what I'd like to leave you with. Okay.